大家出席。
Good morning. Welcome to the 7th meeting of the Bills Committee. We'll continue to meet with the administration about the bill. Before the close of the last meeting, two members would like to ask questions, Mr. Au Lok Him and Ms. Claudia Mo. Before I drew a line, they were not able to ask questions before I adjourned the meeting, so I'll give the floor to them. And then the administration will take us to part 2 of the bill. 1 minute, 4th round, Claudia. I just want to remind the administration for the March of the Volunteers. I did ask why in English it is simply called March of Volunteers. Weren't they curious to consult the Malian authorities as to why this was the English rendition? Because in Chinese, Yong, bravery, is missing from the English title. As of 1996, I think they had another English translation, March On, Brave People of Our Nation. So I think, what about the word brave? Of course, you haven't got the word justice. Now you are promoting the national anthem. I think you should be better prepared. Now, I turn to my question, rap. Rap, I think that's a subculture of the United States. I don't think you can actually regard it as something which is solemn. If it is something not regarded as solemn, then can the Secretary say categorically that if you rap the national anthem of the PRC, it is indeed and clearly a case of committing an offense? Who will take this question? No. As to whether an act is an offense, well, I think it is clear from the wording, and you may want to refer to clause 7. So are you saying that rapping the national anthem would not be an offense? Please be brief. Well, Ms. Mo referred to a particular form of music. If you use that format to sing the national anthem, as far as the bill is concerned, it would not be an offense. Mr. Au is not in the conference room, so any other questions concerning Clause 1 and 2, legal advisor? No, we have scrutinized the 2 clauses. Next, part 2, Ms. Lam, please. Please brief us on clause 3. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we are on part 2, clause 3, playing and singing of national anthem, as well as clauses 4 and 5. First of all, clause 3, standard for playing and singing. Please refer to Article 6 of the national law, and we provide for the standards for playing and singing. In other words, it must be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. Any questions? If you would like to ask questions, please press the button. Or would you like to have clause 4 taken together as well? Yes, I do have a question. Yes, Dr. K.K. Kwok, first round, 4 minutes. Mr. Chairman, it's indeed funny what is meant by in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. I think people have different mental states. Say, for example, when we think about how Tian Han died, then we would become very sad. And then for somebody who died for the March of the Volunteers, who died as a result of political persecution, I think to keep its dignity, we should be saying that we mourn Tian Han. We should write it on a placard, and then we sing the national anthem, because we mourn this person who was persecuted until he died. There were many other similar cases in the history of China. So if we use this approach, that is, before we play and sing the national anthem, I read out this elegy, and if I also state this very tragic fact, or if I write if I write down the historical record that is other than Tian Han, who else had died in the decades of history of the CCP. I think it is in keeping with this dignity because I respect history, I respect the facts. In Hong Kong, of course, I hope that we still have one country, two systems. I hope it would not be regarded as subverting the nation, and I would not be accused of stirring up trouble and picking a fight. So when we sing Arise, people who do not want to be slaves, I would like to say that arise, we don't want to be a slave persecuted by the CCP. I think that's how I would interpret it, and I regard this as totally in keeping with their dignity. If I'm to do this, what will be sort of, what is the judgment? I'm afraid by having the national anthem, we will be having excuses to suppress different ways of expression. Before the national anthem law is to be applied to Hong Kong, we have our own approach when we examine the history of China, like Tian Han being persecuted to death and others were subject to suppression and they died as a result. I think it's a matter of stating the Chinese history. I'm afraid halfway through the song when we talk about this historical fact, and then I continue. To me, I think it is entirely in keeping with the dignity. And I will be upholding the spirit of the march. That is, I would like to air some allegations on behalf of people who have been persecuted so sadly. I would be fully respectful, and I would advise people to dress in black to mourn the people who have been persecuted. Clause 3 of Part 2, that's about standard for playing and singing. It should be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with this dignity. It is directional. In keeping with this dignity, I think you apply your common sense to understand it. Well, as to whether you are breaching the law, you have to turn to clause 7, and we have to make a judgment according to the facts. That is, whether you publicly and intentionally insult the national anthem. Well, I talked about the facts. Tian Han was persecuted by the CCP, and he died as a result. So I'm telling you what the facts were like. If I wait until clause 7, I would be ruled out of order. Please be brief. Yes, as far as the scenario is concerned, I think Dr. K.K. Kwok talked about the circumstances, the intention, etc. As to whether it is an offense under clause 7, it depends on whether it is a matter of publicly and intentionally insulting the national anthem. In what way was I insulting it? Claudie Mo, standard for playing and singing. Now, it says the national anthem must be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. K in Chinese is dignity. When we talk about dignity, then it is dignity per se. Now, the Secretary also talked about applying common sense. What is meant by its dignity? So it means national anthem's dignity. In English, it is even more awkward. It is said,
in a way that is keeping with its 嗱呢度真係啦 its dignity， 咁人哋就真係點知你嘅。
So how can people understand what is meant by its dignity? Why is it so awkwardly drafted? Are you sort of copying the wording from the national law on the mainland of China? Mr. Pang, please.
Thanks for a small question. Well, when we're referring to the keeping in its dignity, we're saying that the anthem as the symbol and sign of the PRC, as the dignity of this identity. Of course, I understand. So if we go without the its and moving the it's from the English, just saying it in keeping with the dignity or dignified presentation, that would take care of it. Why such awkward expression? Ms. Mo is asking, can we abolish K in Chinese and the it's in the English when it express the anthem of the is the dignity of the sign and symbol of the PRC? Yes, I got it already. As we're asking what is the how dignified is the national anthem? I want you to be in line with the needs of the person, and you have to tell me what the needs of the person actually is. Mr. Pang, we talk about the dignity of the national anthem as the symbol and sign, as the status. Well, it is simply parroting. Okay, I'll carry on. I hope the other colleagues will call through. As for the etiquette for playing and singing, are we on 3 actually? Oh, we're just on 3. Okay. Okay, I shall carry on. So in Chinese, and you claim that in a way, in keeping with his dignity, and English is rather lightly that.
文嘅表達唔係太過適合咧。
Isn't the English expression isn't inappropriate as if you're just chatting in a bar? So it's claimed that and in a way that's keeping the dignity. So do we really need to keep in a way in the sentence? There's no such expression equivalent in the Chinese. Why we some? So it's simply to correspond with the Chinese 對方式. So in Chinese, in English dignity, I believe that the English Chinese is synoptic. I disagree. You claim it in a way. You claim it is singular. In a way. Why don't you say in ways? There are it seems there are different form of expression. Just now, we were told that while rap is obviously not an all is as a subculture, and yet I believe that they disagree. Well, maybe you can consider it is strong enough to move your amendment. While you answer on his behalf, I have like quite a few 10 seconds left. He didn't answer my question. Why did it have to be in a way? It should be in ways. Mr. Pang, can it be ways? According to a law, in a way is also equivalent to in way because singular will cover the plural. So singular is equal to plural. Mr. Alvin Young, 4 minutes. I'm more concerned about when the court reading the clause 3 on the understanding of its dignity. So can Mr. Pang help to illuminate us? In other legislation, is there any word called dignity? And in local laws, how the court interpret something an abstract object, which is the national anthem in this case, of its dignity? So how would the DOJ interpret it or make a statement to the court in explaining the dignity of the national anthem? Mr. Pang. Or Mr. Roy Tang, Permanent Secretary. So for current legislation, there are quite a few examples. The more identified ones will be CAT 159X and Clause 5D, Section 5D, that the Lawyer Society will not permit any practitioners who are not able to law firm to not upholding the dignity of the profession. In 2017, and June 30th of the Private Columbarium Ordinance of the Section 67, that anyone in this to deal with the ashes in the columbarium must take into account the respect and act in accordance with the dignity of the deceased. And for the some of the legislation by the UN, local Hong Kong also frequently deployed the word dignity. Can Mr. Pang to supplement? None. Okay, Mr. Young, please continue. Just now, the two examples cited by the Permanent Secretary Tang, including those that cover lawyers in English, which of the wording have reflect dignity, or is this through other words? Okay, let me furnish information. In keeping with dignity of the legal profession, the word dignity is used, and we're second on the private columbarium ordinance, and so English is having regard to the regard of dignity of the deceased persons concerned. As for the example, the site with the UN also use the word dignity. And on the drafting of the legislation for clause 3 and 4, I know we haven't started 4 yet. However, I want to see it together. For the 4 bracket 2 AB, I just want to talk about drafting. Why not fold 3 and 4 together as one? Well, there's nothing to do with the content of 4. It's just a drafting approach question. Okay, let me halt. If you're willing, I'm willing to scrutinize 3 and 4 together, which will save a bit of time. Speaker of mic. I'm consulting the members. I haven't quite entered the clause 4. I just want to talk about the law drafting technique. I want to ask Mr. Peng, when clause 3 we discussed had to be further elaborate as 4, why don't we fold together as 1? Okay, please continue. Okay, let's start count again. Mr. Peng. And for clause 3, and I'll set out that the national anthem will be played in a way to depicting with dignity. And for clause 4, we'll talk about the etiquette at the occasion, but not the manner in which the anthem is played and sung. So it's 2 different matters. Okay, Chairman. So there's only 1 sentence in clause 3. So which mainland law provision are this article clause 3 referring to? Article 6 of the National Anthem Law. And for Article 6, it clearly claimed that not a negative provision which had to have a scope. And yet for clause 3 of the National Anthem Bill, is a rather an open-ended wording. Okay, can you give a concise answer? So can 3 or 4 can be dealt with concretely? No, because they touch on different scope. So respond to Mr. Young for clause 3 with a positive setup, or a directional provision. So we need to do written positively instead of negative wording. Next, Mr. Ray Chan, 4 minutes. So my question is similar to Mr. Young's observation. When we're asking about the dignity as a concept, the government will use a negative concept of what you should not do, or doing what will be considered as a detriment of its dignity. So you claim you have a positive description, but you're not able to give a positive definition of dignity instead of not doing what would to its detriment. Well, dignity as a concept is important. It's shown at the first time in clause 3, and in the preamble it shows up that to uphold national sovereignty. Well, it meant that it could be a passive, as in just leave it alone, not doing anything particular, or proactively doing something. Well, not as we answer my question on that. And for dignity, there's no attempt to give a definition, even though there's no legal definition of dignity. But I hope that today at this meeting, so maybe the official responsible drafting the law, and so based on your understanding of the dignity in Chinese, to explain to this Bills Committee, and this is correspond to Article 6 of the National Anthem Law of China Sea. And in English, it would be not to the detriment of the dignity, quote unquote. So it's rather a negative definition to define dignity. And we'll tangle with clause 3 is positive. and for 2B will be a 42B will be a negative. You claim that national anthem is played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity, which is quite abstract. Well, having this sentence does not help us in complying with standards, because the standard was that you shouldn't be doing this or that. Why don't you put it at the standard for playing music scene? Just claim that 1 and 2 would achieve the same objective. The first question was about that the mentioning of dignity of different provisions, would they carry a different meaning? And for second, can you explain, since there's no legal definition, can you explain what the implication of dignity? Please don't use the negative approach. The clause 3 has mentioned in clause 6 and also the preamble. And for the dignity in these 3 places, do they all each carry different meaning? And second question, can you try to explain what you mean by dignity, since there's no such legal definition? Mr. Pang? So we take reference with the PRC law before we proceed, and we see that the meaning of dignity in different circumstances. I'll check the needs for dignity. There are 2 big meanings. Allow me to speak English.
Or quality of being worthy of honor or respect。咁呢個意思我見到係比較符合咧。喺第3
that is more befitting of the national anthem as a symbol and sign of the nation, which matches the B. A B and dignity as another meaning will be
呢個其實符合翻喺第4條咧第2款
matches a clause 4 of deport themselves in dignity. So when someone's engaged education, how should they behave education, which described the dignity on a person. So after these 2 appearances, I see there's 2 different meanings and still matches those of dictionary. Well, let me touch on next part of my question. For clause 3, I already explained the positive meaning in the preamble. So what is the function of clause 3? As it possibly described that the national anthem should be played in some way, which matches Article 6 of the national anthem law. What you claim is negative. How save that for next round? Mr. Edichi, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. For this national anthem bill, the useful provision is only clause 7. So clause 4 itself doesn't search much use. And you claim that the is contained in the national legislation. Mr. Chu, we're only discussing clause 3. But clause 4 itself is useless. But clause 3 is even worse. So clause 3 is not reflected in Article 6 of the PRC National Anthem Law. However, for the Macau, they will import Article 6 and 7 of the National Anthem Law to become their clause 8. So Hong Kong made up 2 parts. First, they made up this standard. They have when there's no mention in the national legislation on standard for playing and singing, and in the national law of the Macau legislation, there's no description of in keeping with this dignity. I think the clause 3 come out of nowhere. I heard from Mr. Pang. I'm not convinced this Bills Committee that clause 3 itself has its necessity. I believe the question is clear enough. So it's really optional, is it? So before Mr. Pang's supplement, I want to say that when for the local legislation of national law, unlike what the member said, that they would not just simply import so otherwise there would not be local legislation. We take into Hong Kong circumstances in drafting. So if there any difference with the national legislation, will I explain why we shall do so?
講係
係
Mr. Chu, well, please tell us on what basis have you chosen to differ from the national law? Well, we have made reference to Article 6. It says not to the detriment of its dignity. As we have said for Part 2, for this particular clause, it is directional. So if you put it in a negative way, this is not in line with the directional nature of the provision, and that's why we've chosen the current drafting format. What about clause 4 bracket 2 bracket A? Would it just be the same? Sorry. Are you now on clause 4? Sorry. Just now, Mr. Pang said that it's directional in nature. Mr. Chu, I think it's better for us to deal with clauses 3 and 4 together. Would you agree? Yes, I know you would like to do it in that way. If the question is related, I'm not actually on clause 4, but it's Mr. Pang who dragged in clause 4. He said that the directional nature of the provision means that we need to have a positive approach. And that takes me back to the original question, that is, it is superfluous here. Please give a brief answer. Clause 4 is about the etiquette that has to be followed. That's not the standard for playing and singing. They cover 2 different areas. Mr. Chairman, for Article 6 of the national law, if we read the first part of the sentence, shall be played and sung by the lyrics and music provided in the annex to the law. I think that's more relevant here. Are you saying that you are happy with the inclusion of this part in the notes or the explanatory notes? So that's about the music and the score. Please be brief, because if you don't play or sing by the lyrics and music, then you'll be caught by clause 7. That is altering the lyrics. Why can't you adopt a positive approach? That is, you need to sing and play it by the lyrics and the music. So how come that you've chosen a different approach? Fernando Zhang, 4 minutes. For clause 3, Mr. Chairman, you have the standard for playing and singing. I agree with Eddie. I find it very odd. Well, it says here, it must be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. The impression is that you are trying to make it feel rigid. Mr. Chairman, I think you would recall that at our public hearing, there was one participant. Halfway in his presentation, he suddenly started to sing the national anthem. You tried to stop him. Well, what he meant in his presentation and in his singing, I think he was trying to preserve the dignity of the national anthem, and he was in support of the bill. So for somebody to sing the national anthem all out of a sudden in a conference room here, would it be an offense? I think you're talking about the etiquette, the occasion, then it will be under clause 4. So what is meant by played and sung in a way, blah, blah, blah. So is it something different from what I have just referred to? So what is meant by the way that it is played and sung? Secretary, clause 3 is directional. So when you outline a scenario and try to find out whether it is an offense, please go to clause 7. The 2 should be dealt with separately. The way it is played and sung, it should be in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. By dignity, it means that the national anthem is the symbol and sign of the People's Republic of China. Chairman, I was very specific about the occasion. I think most of us were present during the public hearing. So the participant suddenly started to sing the national anthem. halfway in his presentation of his views in this conference room. I want to know whether that was in line with the way that the national anthem should be played and sung. So that's not the way that it was played and sung. It's a question of the occasion. He sang the national anthem here, and it was being broadcast live. So would it be in keeping with his dignity? I don't quite understand your question, but please try to answer the question. Well, as to whether the occasion or the circumstances that it was played and sung would be a breach of the law, we have to go back to clause 7. Now back to clause 3. The way that it should be played and sung should be in keeping with its dignity. It's directional, and so it is drafted in a positive manner. I don't think the person involved intended to insult the national anthem. That's not my point. But by having clause 3 here, it means that every time you play and sing the national anthem, you have to follow this standard. So every time you're expected to do so, and you have said that it should be in keeping with its dignity. What is meant by in keeping with its dignity? So I have given you a real example when everybody was present, and still you can't give an answer. We had a public hearing. Somebody started to sing the national anthem. I want to know whether the way he sang the national anthem was in a way that's in keeping with his dignity. Now you are drafting a bill, you are making a law, and you are supposed to give directions here, and still you are not able to answer the question. So what is meant by the standard? Mr. Tang, I'm not quite sure about the scenario outlined by Fernando Cheung, but not assuming it was a real case. Now, he stood, if somebody stands solemnly, etc., then it is in keeping with the dignity. Certainly, he didn't stand solemnly. Well, I think clause 3 isn't about the occasions. The standard is to be followed on every occasion. Gary Fan, when I asked a question about the preamble, I also made reference to clauses 2 and 3, and I highlighted the point about dignity. I tried to compare the two versions. I've also examined the areas where words like dignity and respect were repeated. Now, for clause 3 and 4, you talk about the positive and the negative approaches respectively. So I want to know whether we could have something more precise, that is, what is meant by the standard for playing and singing, instead of just talking about with dignity and disrespectfully, etc. Let me cite an example. You asked me to outline a scenario. Let me give you an example. If you ask what is a violin, then somebody will say it is a small size viola, and then the other way round. You can't answer you haven't actually answered the question. So I already asked this question when we dealt with the preamble. At that time, the secretary and the permanent secretary told us that dignity hasn't been given a legal definition in the laws of Hong Kong. But then the PS today cited at least 3 pieces of legislation, including the Private Columbarium Ordinance, drawing our attention to examples of the usage of the word dignity. But still, you are not answering our question. That is why we should have clause 3 here. All we want to avoid is to avoid people falling into the scenario in which they are accused of being disrespectful. If you say that if you do not disrespect, then it is a case of respecting it. And what is dignity? And then you say that you have to deport yourselves with dignity. So I just wonder if this is fine. Now, Schedule 1. Now let me go to Schedule 1. You talk about the standard for playing and singing. So are you taking us to Schedule 1? That is the lyrics, the beats, the tempo, the scores, etc., like the pace of the march, etc. So I suppose you should have referred to the tempo, the lyrics, the pacing, etc. in Schedule 1 instead of simply dismissing it by saying that in a way that is in keeping with the dignity. Well, Clause 3 doesn't carry a penalty, it is directional, so you won't be accused of breaching the law as a result of Clause 3. Well, we have to respect the national anthem, so it should be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its status as the symbol and sign of PRC. So we haven't got a scale to measure what is being done. We want to know whether you have done something which is insulting the national anthem, and that is in Clause 7. A number of elements have been included there. But what about the degree? If it is to such a degree that you regard it as not respecting it or insulting it, then what worries me is that there may be a gray area. So it is a matter of the degree, and exactly that would become a problem. Well, I think it is clear when we talk about the criminal liability, it means that you have the intention and you do it publicly. If you haven't got the intention to insult the national anthem, then you are respectful and you won't be breaching the law. Poor Chair, I can understand the concern. This is because sometimes we are being flexible in our laws so as to allow law enforcement agencies and the courts to apply common sense to deal with the cases. Otherwise, it means that we are not able to sort of govern what people do. I have examined this particular part, and so when we refer to the solicitors' group practice rules, talking about keeping with the dignity of the legal profession, when a solicitor has his qualification suspended, then it's similar to sending the solicitor to jail. So I had a hard time as a result of that clause. Now, we aren't just talking about local laws, national law is involved, and so the draftsmen have to borrow the terms and make reference to the mainland laws. For the wording, for the word dignity, well, it doesn't exist in the vacuum. We don't just have it in clauses 3 and 4. For the most important clause, clause 7, allow me to skip to that because we are on a very important point. For clauses 7 and 8, that's about insult. It talks about undermining the dignity. In other words, the word dignity is being cross-referenced here. You may very well say that clause 3 is directional in nature, but it is also very critical. What I can say is that we need to have trust. We need to have confidence in our courts. That is, they would follow our convention and they will apply common sense, and then they will come up with an interpretation of dignity on the basis of what a reasonable man would do. Otherwise, if we dwell on dignity, then there would be even more unnecessary legal disputes, and then there will be even more gray areas. It's impossible. So unless you don't have faith in our legal system, you don't trust our courts. If I may also ask the administration to comment, other than the difficulty that I've referred to, I want to know if you can improve upon the drafting so that ordinary citizens, other than lawmakers here or people who are familiar with our laws, will have more guidance so that they can, on the basis of common sense, understand the case better. Well, I'm doing some promotion here. I used to be accused of not in keeping with the dignity of the legal profession. But nowadays, when you open the papers, then you can see that there are many advertisements. So I think we can never have a clear definition, but still, please give us more information so as to allay our worries.
Mr. Wright, we've known we're not scrutinizing Clause 4. The function of Clause 4 to hope to satisfy the requirements by Mr. Chair that clearly laid out that when placing the etiquette, those in attendance to observe what kind of etiquette. For example, if they stand solemnly and deport themselves with dignity and not behave in a way disrespectful, I believe that that had comprehensively amount to in keeping with this national anthem dignity. Thank you, Mr. Poche, for pinpointing the characteristic and strength of the common law. Next, Ms. Tanya Chan. So the point raised by Mr. Chair, which I found peculiar. We must understand that very often when the LegCo is scrutinizing some technical legal perspective or some raise that what would happen in the real life. But for those who had appeared before the court and when the members of the public appear in the court, they claim they're not aware of breaking the law. That's why that whenever possible, we hope the administration can provide more explanation and hope to explain their approach so that even those that don't have legal knowledge, they will know the wording and figure what it is. And just now the Bureau or the administration had explained, looking about the manner and etiquette for playing singing. I would say that solemn is also a somewhat abstract descriptor, and for Clause 3 is more like the mentality for playing and singing for a national anthem instead of a standard. If we claim that as a standard, Chairman, I feel that it's like in Schedule 1-2, whether on the tempo, the notes, the lyrics, I always feel that this should be seen as a standard per se. But now we're talking about the state of mind and in keeping with the dignity. And Mr. Poche is for 7, as for the offense of insulting behavior, which came to undermine the dignity. So I'm referring that as for insult by means of the undermining dignity of the national anthem as a symbol and sign of PRC. And just now we touched on what do you mean by passing. What means that those who didn't fail are considered passing. When you talk about what we mean by failing, those that who pass. So this is not a answer to assure the public. For when you call it the etiquette, even when we have done all these, for Clause 4, as I understood, there's no penalty. However, when to Clause 7, when it comes to insulting behavior, which specifically claim that will undermine the dignity. Is it a gesture or a state of mind? To them, they simply have nothing to follow. Let's not talk about the vocal range. Well, let's say if you sing off tune, we count as a not. It's quite hard for the public to grasp. So up to now, I'm not convinced that from Clause 6, Article 6 of the National Anthem Law can be correspond to Clause 3. So what's the actual use of Clause 3? So it's more like a mentality or a state of mind. Do you agree? Is it a hard standard or a some abstract state of mind, or what is the actual use of Clause 3? Mr. Patrick Nip, for Clause 3 and 4, we're referring to a directional provision. For Clause 3, if we have any penalty involves that we have to be very clear. But now this is just really a directional provision, which incorporates what Ms. Chen's area emission of Ms. Chen. However, for the penalties on Clause 7, there are some specific elements. Hope they could see it separately, so the public had a good idea. There's no penalty in directional provision, and Chairman understood when they claimed there are penalty or not. I see there are none in Clause 3 and 4. However, Clause 7, when it comes to insulting behavior, when it comes to undermining dignity of nationalism, which give rise to the intent. So we can discuss it when we actually get to Clause 7. Dr. Kwok, second round, 3 minutes. I think the secretary had been being irresponsible. So he claims that the government has set out a standard as per Clause 3, and he claimed that the standard for playing and singing, which is in keeping with the dignity in a way. For a good citizen, let's assume he is a good citizen, I consider myself as one. So now that I'm playing and singing, I'm just adding a narrative of facts, like I said, for example, mentioning how the CCP prosecuted Mr. Tian Han, the lyricist or the March of the Volunteers, and a lot of the innocent victims. For example, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Liu Xiaobo, which is a fact of the PRC history. And before we play and after we play, we have stated such facts. And would you constitute an acceptable standard? I'm asking for standard, and you can't say that there will be class 7. I'm just referring to standard. What standard? I've answered Dr. Kwok's question many times. The question clause reaches a direction provision. The claim that when you play and sung in a way is in keeping with the dignity. And speaking of the penalty, and if you have an intent, an action, and looking at the circumstantial fact and the setting, so I can't give it across the board answer. You can't give me a standard, and now since the risk of breaking the law, I'll be humbly ask you time and again about the standard. Dr. Kwok, please refer to, how about you sang me once so I will adopt your rendition as a standard? I think the question is fair enough. So look at the provision of Clause 3. What's the definition of Clause 3? So the Clause 3 is a directional provision but without penalty. I'm not asking for the penalty. I'm asking for the standard. The standard is in a way that's in keeping with the dignity. Please don't debate, Dr. Kwok. I'm looking for a standard. I heard that Mr. Nip is trying to answer you. Your question is clear enough. Secretary, the standard will be in a way that's in keeping with his dignity. Well, is this worse than common sense? Chairman, he's getting irresponsible. But when asking about the standard, and I was replied that the way it was sung and played is already a standard, and the tempo is considered a standard. The range is a standard. Anything departing from this will be regarded as lack in dignity. So I shall follow you and claim there's no standard. However, there's consequences. I would call that they would just do arbitrary prosecution. When asked about the standards, so how about you sing for me once? So any consequence for breaching Clause 3, there's no penalty. There's a standard for a constitutional offense. In Clause 7, they have list out the elements. You have intent and the actual act. I'm asking for a standard. How save that for third round, please? Next, Dr. Fernando Chung. Second round, 3 minutes. So they include this provision in Clause 3 on the standard for playing and singing. However, through a lot of back and forth, they couldn't give a straight answer, and they claimed that it just kept on repeating that in a way that in keeping with its dignity, and how define it is purely up to the individual. Okay, let's have I cited a concrete example, and yet they evade the question and can't give an answer, and we claim that if we sing it in the venue, they would refer to an occasion, not the manner is played and sung. So what do you mean that in a way? What do you refer to it in a way? I think that question has been answered. I think we're repeating yourself, but how about just answer that once again? Let me try to answer that once more. When we look at the whole national anthem bill, or the national anthem law, we discussed that they have the octave version and the and looking together with a Clause 4 and with the behavior standard and the feel that if you fulfill both conditions would definitely meet the definition in a way that's in keeping with the dignity. So we should either follow the numbered musical notation and the stave notation, so that will see as fulfilling the condition of in a way that's in keeping with dignity. Well, that's my understanding. Dr. Cheung, I think you have to clearly define what you mean by in a way. So in other words, that within the standard, if anything that's departing from the standard, let's say for the stave note and the brief notation didn't strictly follow it, or the music or the behavior stand doesn't follow, so that is not, well, we would have failed to meet this directional provision. Yeah, Chairman, I think it's correct. However, like the Secretary said, there's no penalty in this directional provision. I know this is directional provision. However, in the future, there will be a lot of behavior that may contravene this directional provision. Though there's no penalty, however, then a lot of people will be breaking the law. So what should we do? And Chairman, I think we're concerned that whether they will contravene the law. So the penalty provisions would have been a public with an intent to insult the national anthem. Is about how do you mean by how a lot of a little or somewhat respect? There's still a yardstick in this direction provision. If you impose a standard and you claim that you have to stay with the notation and behavior and the way to sway and sung. So normal people are not able to fulfill this standard. So why do you have this in place? So that the ordinary people may have the chance to breach the law, even though there's no penalty. How about just answer one more time? Is it really optional? Versus a national law, when we localize the relevant statutes in Hong Kong, about the manner it would be the standard which we're playing for singing, that we in a way to keep identity, the common sense understanding. I believe that's the last question on this. Next, Mr. Elohim, 4 minutes. So sitting in the meeting so long, I still don't understand the administration reply that why the Article 6 of the PRC National Anthem Law mentioned that the national anthem shall be played and sung by the lyrics and music provided in the annex to this law. However, this disappeared in the bill. As I recall correctly, the administration claimed that the Clause 7 will deal with the question of insult. And for the and this provide in the annex of the law is a definitive provision. These are two different things. The legislative intent, we have to set out the provision so that you can refer to that as per the lyrics provided in the annex or schedule. So when we on clause 3, this has not disappeared. Are you undermining the legislative intent of the national anthem law, the PRC? I don't think we need to get as far as clause 7. And who will take the question? Mr. Roy Cheng. Mr. Peng had given a comprehensive explanation. I will have Mr. Cheng to repeat his answer. Thank you for Mr. L's question. And for clause part 2 is more like a directional provision. There's simply of a guidance. We feel that we have a positive expression of what should we do instead of what shouldn't be done will be more apt. And here we explain that why we said that is in a way that's in keeping with its dignity. As for the Article 6, in Clause 7, that we dealt with the penalty provisions in Clause 7. If they won't have deliberate, altered, or in a distorted, disrespectful way, that will fall under Clause 7 instead of 3. So Mr. Pang's reply that DOJ also took the view that the national anthem law of PRC had its flaws, and Hong Kong can free to do its own enhancement. And second, if you can't hold a specific standard, instead of making better legislation, you can forego with the standards, and they claim like the principle for playing and singing that would have taken care of the problem. Am I getting correctly? Allow me to explain.
In fact, the Secretary has made it clear we have fully reflected the legislative intent and purpose. We have also taken into account common law as well as the actual circumstances in Hong Kong. It's not a matter of comparing our system or our drafting with that on the mainland and which is better. Well, as to the inadequacies mentioned in the question, I don't think this is the case. We're talking about local legislation of a piece of national law. We have to take into account our legal system and our drafting approach. My question is, we practice common law, but how come that you are doing what you have mentioned? That is, you won't specify the musical scores, and yet you say that this is in keeping with the common law. Now, if we refer to the lyrics and the score, well, in fact, Article 6 of the national law refers to it. We have also included the lyrics and the music, so that has been dealt with. Are you saying that because we practice common law and so it is sufficient if we have it in the interpretation part? Let me talk about the principle for playing and singing instead of using the term standard. Would you agree with me? Would it then be in line with common law? Well, when we refer to common law, when we have local legislation, of course we follow our own system and our own drafting approach. Your time is up. Next, Claudia Mo. 3 minutes, second round. Fine. Now we are talking about this bill, and then for this clause, it is said that it is directional. In Chinese, just say 指導條文, don't call it 指導性條文. Now it says that it must be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. Well, I'm sure the Mr. Lin Yutang, the Chinese scholar, would never agree to this approach. I think it should have been said it is to be something. I don't have a legal background. I'm not legally trained. But then for the word "so" in Chinese, it means that it is going to happen. Say, for example, you will be prosecuted. You will be prosecuted if you have done something. So it isn't about something in the future. It means something is definitely going to happen. Now, if I simply take the Chinese version, it says 需以符合其尊嚴嘅方式奏唱. So by merely looking at the Chinese version, 需, then I would think that it should be translated into will be or shall be. How come that the degree has been aggravated? That is, in English, your version is must be. Will be, shall be, must be, it is to be. When it comes to drafting, on what basis would you make the choice? But in Chinese, usually it is just 需 or 會. Sorry, speaker is off mic. I can't hear you. Please speak closer to the microphone. Can you hear me? Let me explain shall, must, and is to be. When it comes to drafting, well, when we impose a responsibility on an individual, in the past we used to use the word shall. Say you shall, it means you have the responsibility to do so. About 10 years ago, our drafting division has changed shall into must because we believe that this is nearer to everyday English. Because usually you won't say you shall come home. We will usually say you must come home. Is to be. We say that it is a softer approach. You don't necessarily have to do it, but you're supposed to do it. So shall will no longer appear in today's English, legal English. So usually we would use must to render. So I'm sure Ms. Mo has come across this. Mr. Shu Ka-chun, not present. Then the next one would be Mr. Eddie Chu, again not present. Then Mr. Ao Nok Him. Second round, 3 minutes. Yes, if I may continue with the question, that's why are you saying that this is more in line with the local legislation approach for clause 3, standard for playing and singing? For clause 3, it is pitched in a positive way. Clause 4, etiquette for playing and singing. But then for the mainland law, it is different. It is a double negative. Shall be played and sung by the lyrics and music, but not to the detriment of its dignity. Why would you opt for the positive approach? You said you would like to reflect the purpose and intent of the national law, but why are you abandoning the double negative? Are you saying that this is more in line with the legislative intent of local legislation here? Mr. Pang, for part 2, as I have said, this is directional. So when it comes to the presentation, we would use a positive approach. This is more in line with the nature of the provision, which is directional. If we say that you are not allowed to do this or that, then it is not in line with the directional nature. So you're saying that this is flawed. So you're saying that that's better for the case of Hong Kong. I don't think you need to dodge this issue, because in this way it shows that Hong Kong can fare better than the mainland. Let me say this once again. That's not what we mean. The systems are different. We have directional provisions. They may not have the same concept. I don't think we should use this to criticize others or give comments on this area. Well, if you don't want to give any comments, then it's better for you to cooperate wholesale. But of course, I won't favor such an approach. I hope we have a common understanding. That is whether we have room to have some local adjustments, so that in the context of local legislation, we can make some changes. I just want to point out to you that you have already carried out some adjustments, and in fact lawmakers would like you to take on board our suggestions, because we're worried that we will be sent to jail just because of what we have said. Now, if we uphold our own drafting system, then you shouldn't have dismissed our worries and say that your version is the only version that is acceptable and all our suggestions are not feasible. Let me say this. I think we want to reflect the legislative intent and purpose of the national law. We want to take into account our actual circumstances, our common law system, and to have local legislation of the national law. Secretary, I think Mr. Au also agreed that we shouldn't have copied the national law wholesale. Otherwise, we could have promulgated it. For local legislation, it means that we have variations from the national law, and we can explain the variation. And this is exactly what we are doing here. Mr. Edichu. Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. First of all, on many occasions, the Secretary emphasized that clause 3 doesn't carry a penalty. It is a directional provision. My question is, does it mean that a directional provision without penalty could be worded in an unclear manner, and it can be optional and we can dispense with it? Would he agree with me? And then for the national flag and national emblem ordinance, we didn't have the directional provisions when we had local legislation. But here you are doing this, and I think you must give us a very sound reason. You can't simply say that since it is there in the national law, we must have it as well. But in fact, you have a choice, and you can make a decision whether to adopt it or not. Now, you have emphasized that there is only a penalty under clause 7. But what about clause 3? Clause 3 is very unclear. You say that it is directional. Why are you introducing it into Hong Kong? What effect would you like to get? Does it mean that on certain occasions, like in a school, even though somebody cannot be arrested, but then the person can be accused of not meeting the standard for playing and singing the national anthem in a way that is in keeping with his dignity. So why would you want to have clause 3? What effect would you like to get? I think question 1 is clear. I think it's a yes or no question. Whether it is optional, I think he has answered your question. Can you do a sloppy job just because it's optional? Well, for local legislation, 2 objectives. First of all, help people to respect national anthem. Second, for acts insulting national anthem, we must have penalties. So for the first one, to promote national anthem, we need to have directional provisions to talk about the standard and etiquette for playing and singing. And that's why we need a positive approach. We need directional provisions. You say you would like to facilitate, we would like to help the citizens to respect the national anthem. So which approach are we going to adopt? Let me take this opportunity to ratify what Mr. Ejichu has said. For national flag and national emblem ordinance, please go to section 4, which makes it clear that you mustn't display national flags which have been damaged or etc. So again, there isn't a penalty. As to the other question, which is a longer one, Mr. Pang answered the question twice. I haven't got anything else to add. Mr. Yip Kin Yuen, for the bill, for clause 4, this is about the etiquette for playing and singing. I think the provision itself is quite brief. In December 2014, the State Council has come up with advice concerning the etiquette for playing and singing the national anthem, and we have got details. Let me quote, that is, when you play and sing, you will have to be standing solemnly, you have a sense of ceremony, you need to be solemn, you should sing along, and you should be clear in your pronunciation. You mustn't stop in the middle of it. You mustn't talk with each other. You shouldn't clap your hands to follow the beats. You mustn't take any telephone calls or do anything not relevant to the national anthem. No other songs should be played immediately after the national anthem. So there are lots more details and the requirements are more stringent. Now for our national anthem bill, I want to know whether you are going to make reference to what I have referred to, that is what the State Council has promulgated, published in December 2014 in your explanatory notes. And would you be adopting the same content, being solemn, etc., and also not doing anything? You say that you simply say that people should stand solemnly and do not behave in a way disrespectful to the national anthem. I think that's about clause 4. So save your question till then. We are still on clause 3 only. Mr. Xiu Gao-chun, not present. Then Andrew Wen, 4 minutes first round. Well, when they answered Edichu's question, it brought out the focus of today's questions. That is, for the standard for playing and singing, it is too vague as a standard. First of all, there isn't a legal definition. And then for the words, again, we are not clear about the meaning of the words. Now, you regard it as a standard. Of course, the administration has insisted that it is directional, there isn't a penalty, we don't need to worry. I doubt whether there is or there isn't a penalty.
The provision would be totally meaningless. It was some controversial scenarios or where it's just within a gray area, how should the court assist the case? I believe that the standard for playing and singing will be one of the key elements considered by the court. I disagree with the administration claims that it's abstract or there's no penalty. That's is all right. So my question that and there's no such a provision in the NFNEO, but why must we incorporate this? And you claim that there's one way that NFNEO claims that you can't use display or you use a discolored or a damaged flag. This is a very specific, Chairman. Can't they spot the difference? We know what discolored and broken, damaged. However, he claims that in a way that's keeping with dignity. So what you're referring to? I've been waiting for the whole morning for answers. That's the major difference. So when discussing with the secretary, he replied that would not adopt the mainland laws and we should just introduce when locally and applicable. So why don't we take approach? Even though there's no penalty. There is be a redundant, but causing so much worry. But why should we insist on this? So, are we answer medication whether it dispensable or not? Just one last time, I will stop entertaining questions like these. And the national legislation lay down the requirements, intent that have been fully reflected in the local legislation. And second point, through this national anthem bill, we hope that the public can respect the national anthem. Thus, the respect for the national anthem will, through this directional provision, and on the way to be sung in a way that's keeping the dignity and to express the positive present approach. You have specific provisions on the behavior. Why do we need this sentence? I would never guess your motive. Maybe there was a house written in mainland. That's why I have to follow suit. May I remind you? Okay, maybe I have slightly digressed. Then how did the mainland interpret this? You know, the fate of Liu Xiaobo. He requested that the Chinese Communist Party to act according to the Constitution. The PRC Constitution have made it clear. They have adopted similar wording that the people will have the constitutional basis at the criteria for their actions and have the duty to uphold constitutional duty and to ensure their implementation. Well, apparently to be rude, according to the old sayings of the mainland, are they applicable to the common laws approach of Hong Kong? If this is dispensable, so why do you decide to incorporate this? You can't claim this is unnecessary. You already explained as we need to be our behavior indicators in clause 7. This is the point of contention. I'm not repeating the question. I explained it many times. I'm aware of that. Mr. Kwong, first round, 4 minutes. I think while we're scrutinizing this bill, I believe that we have to get every word as meaning. Well, sitting through all morning, ready for the bureau or those, and the secretary had, no matter how hard they tried, I think the more explaining they do, the more murky they get. But what do you mean by in a way that's keeping with dignity? So the secretary. You claim there's no penalty provision. However, it is indeed incorporated into this bill. The public will ask, what do you mean by in a way that's keeping with its dignity? This is so abstract. There's no definition, even though you mean in a way in keeping with the dignity. The unspoken word that when you say in a way that's not keeping with dignity, even though there's no penalty, but in this bill, there's a gray area that may make you have likelihood of breaching the law. And you're telling us that we should trust the law enforcement agency. We will never know what will happen in the future. Let's say there's a hypothetical scenario. A lot of questions stem from different scenarios. Let's say it happened in a primary school or a secondary school. While I playing and sing in a national anthem, I feel that Dr. Henry Watson sing in a way we came to that I report here to the teachers. Should the teacher deal with it? The teacher can say either no, she may not necessarily disrespectful of the national anthem, and the classroom said, I'm reporting you seriously, otherwise you'll be accused of concealing that. Let's say your classmate sitting next door. When you have an abstract wording and you claim it's a dignity, would be pressing the bureau to explain, unless you tell us that you can give it a demonstration and then we all know what to follow. You have to give the public the peace of mind. So I'm not going to debate whether to dispense, but I believe there's a point for them, this provision. So we have to press for what do you mean by in a way that is keeping with dignity? Well, know the answer. This question has been time again. How should the school deal with it? At the last meeting, the undersecretary had replied. Mr. Pang, let me explain. In a way that's keeping with dignity, that will be correspond to the as the symbol and sign of the PRC. What we can see that in the Ung Shield case, the national flag so is a symbol of the nation as a unique feature, as the PRC and national sovereignty represent the PRC and the dignity of a unification and the territorial integrity. So that how it gives rise to the national anthem. So this is not something out of thin air, but based on past precedents. But at least the flag is a physical object. For a national anthem, there's a lot of, let's say somebody would like to sing with a crying tone, and then people when crowd whenever they sang the national anthem, you should say they're respectful, or you claim that it's a terrible rendition. So that's how we describe a gray area. So even the real explanation is not illuminating. For the same rendition, would be judged differently for different people may arrive at different conclusion. That's why we are targeting in clause 3 how the exact meaning for in a way it is being fitting with the besides the parenting official line. Can you provide more information? Secretary, concise reply. We said many times for this directional provision, there'll be the common sense understanding, as in other laws. There's no definition of dignity set out. Mr. Jeremy Town, 4 minutes. Well, for this whole clause 3, is there such necessity for it to appear in this bill? Let's say for in clause 4, and it mentioned what constitute dignified behavior and so on. Or why do we need to have a clause 3? So to discuss that the clause 3, there's no penalty provision contained. So if you just want to set out and as a topic sentence in a way that is in keeping with the dignity, you could have put it in the preamble, because you mentioned that you want to preserve the dignity of the national anthem. So when already mentioned in the preamble, then why didn't you show up in part 3? So your question is clear. However, this question been answered many occasions while you were absent, or said the secretary provide Mr. Tam a written response. This question is getting very repetitive. Can you ask other kind of questions? Well, there's a new case. I know that there's a schedule clash. I'm not aware of my colleague of that. So how about move on to the next question? So like the chairman said, I hope that I can get a written reply. So if possible, I hope you can refer to. Other colleagues touched on it. So for the Annex B of the National Anthem laws, which article is it based on? So maybe if other colleagues have raised that. You can also include that in your reply as well. And you claim that it's playing and singing. So not only singing, but also the playing of the music. So for singing, your singing style, you just slightly up tune and so on. And besides singing, there's also playing. So how do you define what is the dignified approach? I believe for singing there's an in-depth discussion, and on the playing of the anthem, what do you mean by doing in a way that's in keeping with the dignity? Secretary or department secretary. And that question has been discussed while we on part 1, and for part 1, 2, A and B, I have pointed out 2 annex about the stave notation and the number musical notation, which they have included the lyrics and the score. According to the official stave notation and the number musical notation, if you strictly follow that, I'm sure that they will be compliant with the provision of in a way that's in keeping with the dignity. Let's say somebody is dressing in a circus costume, is a clown, and playing this national anthem. Would it? So that person will be regarded respectful of the national anthem as. Speaking of provision 3 and 4, the example point cited by Mr. Tam will consider as compliant. If he had done other things that give us suspicion that have been an open insult of the national anthem, that would need to consider clause 7. James Cho. While we're asking for clause 3, I was thinking that the way dignity was used, and for a class 4, and the deport themselves with dignity and solemnly, are they somewhat associated, or and about in a way that is in keeping with the dignity have a own unique meaning? And on the mentioning of dignity, a different provision across the bill have been explained. Well, Mr. Peng, any legal definition or precedents that we can make reference to? I explained that we look at dignity in meaning of dictionary have different meaning and different shades of meaning. The first meaning will be
respect。咁呢個似乎切合咧，我哋第3
to befitting of the meaning of clause 3.
咧我 style， 咁呢個其實係切合第4條2款嗰個講緊嗰個出席者。
As if they will apply to the attendance of the occasion, which is on mine we mean deport himself with dignity. Well, of course, the dictionary would convey one meaning. Is there any common law case law, or is that been used in some required to solemn and deport themselves, and there were to what extent they were to become unsolemnly and deport themselves without dignity? So, is there some sort of a system explanation? So, any case law and any common law have ever interpreted the word dignity?
本地法律
Just now, the Permanent Secretary did share with us the usage of dignity in the laws of Hong Kong. We did try to look up the case law, but we didn't seem to locate anything like that. Not even in the judgments for cases under the national flag, no. I want to have some sort of understanding about this clause. Let me outline different scenarios. There are people who can't speak. They can only use sign language. They're using their fingers to make different gestures. So does it mean that they're not supposed to sing? Can they use sign language to sort of sing the lyrics of the national anthem? Fernando Zhang asked this question. Please give us an answer again. For singing and playing, there must be music. When there is music, for people who are speech impaired, and for him to use sign language to express the meaning of the lyrics of the national anthem, we don't think that he is against the etiquette for playing and singing. My understanding is that I think the mainland has recently published the sign language edition of the national anthem. Do we have it in Hong Kong? Do we have it in Hong Kong? In Hong Kong, we haven't got the sign language version of the national anthem. What about people who are hearing impaired? He may be able to hear partially only, and so he may be singing intermittently. Well, for the etiquette for playing and singing, if you can sing, then you sing. Of course, we are not on clause 4, but it's best if we turn to 4 bracket 2a. Well, let me make my question simple. I think you are more about the etiquette for presenting it. Whether he's following the beats and whether he's off-key, I think that's not what you are focusing on, right? Well, last time we did talk about whether you sing or not and whether you're off-key or not. I think you can turn to clause 7. Well, I think it's more about how you deport yourself, right? Well, the secretary did say we didn't expect everybody to be able to sing in a very beautiful way. The important point is to follow the etiquette. Well, I find that the questions are seriously repetitive. So please note this. Next, Ray Chen, 3 minutes, second round. Mr. Chairman, we are on cross-by-cross scrutiny or even word-by-word scrutiny. Well, the secretary was more about penalties, since clause 3 doesn't carry any penalty, and so it seems to me that he was of the opinion that we shouldn't examine it in such great details. Well, I disagree. Whether it carries a penalty or not, once it is written into the law, people would like to have a clear idea. Lawmakers similarly have such a duty to be clear about the meaning. So please don't appear to be impatient. Yes, you can point out that we're repeating ourselves or we're asking unnecessary questions. Now, clause 3, standard for playing and singing. Standard means that it is a scale, it is a yardstick, so as to differentiate one thing from another. Now, under clause 3, you are not helping us to assess the act in relation to the degree of dignity. I've made my point and I don't want to repeat myself. Well, whether it is strict or not strict, then the concepts are clear. But then if you don't do anything that would undermine the dignity, would it be the same as in keeping with the dignity? I'm afraid when it comes to dignity, this is not that clear-cut, but it seems that the Secretary would like us to adopt such an interpretation. If that's the case, make it clear. Does it mean that as long as we don't do anything that would undermine the dignity, then it means that we are keeping with its dignity? Can you clarify that? Secretary, I hope Ray Chen won't misunderstand my intention and my attitude. I've been most patient in my discussion with you. Mr. Pang and my colleagues have repeatedly answered your questions and confirming that Clause 3 is worded in such a way that it is in line with the national law as well as local legislation. In a way that is in keeping with its dignity, I think it's according to how an ordinary person interprets it. As to whether you breach the law, I think it's a matter of insulting the national anthem. So I think it isn't a matter of having a scale and sort of having a scoring table. Now, if you don't act in a way that is an insult to the national anthem, then you won't be caught by Clause 7. I'm not sure whether he doesn't understand my question or he's dodging my question. I am not interested in having a scale. Well, if it is not straight, then it is curved or crooked. It's as simple as that. But in this case, it is not the same. Who would take this question? I think we have answered the question. We have. No, he hasn't. Next, Helena Wong, 4 minutes. Chair, I've been here for a long time. Yes, you did ask us not to pursue the question anymore. But then for Clause 3, it is a directional provision. It doesn't carry a penalty. But still, we are not given a clear answer as to what is meant by dignity and what is meant by played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity. The admin's reply was that we better look up the dictionary. No, I don't think so. James Toh also asked for case law, that is, what is meant by dignity and not in keeping with the dignity. And the answer was no case law. Now, for Clause 3. For Clause 3, well, if you look at the preamble as well as other clauses, clauses 4, 6, and 7 of the bill will tell you that the way it should be played and sung, the occasions that it will be played and sung, and what you mustn't do and what you must do, they are all clearly spelled out in those other places. So do we really need Clause 3? If we want to take out Clause 3, administration, please tell us whether it would undermine your enforcement of the bill and would affect the sort of implementation. Without Clause 3, are you saying that we are sort of undermining the bill and we are not able to meet the target or meet the objective as outlined by the administration? If I remember correctly, this is the 8th time that the question is put, so maybe give her a written answer. Chair, you did say that they have answered the question, but they failed to answer our question. I want to know, if we take out Clause 3, does it mean that we are not able to meet your objective, that is to prevent people doing certain things when the national anthem is being played and sung? Well, I've already said that we would not allow further questions on this point, but still I've let you raise your question so the admin can provide something in writing. What's your other question? I haven't got other questions. They haven't convinced us. They haven't answered our question. If I would like to move an amendment, say to delete Clause 3, what is the admin's answer? Would you allow me proposing such an amendment? I think they have answered your question, but I can ask them to repeat the answer in writing. No, they haven't. Next, Mr. Yip, 2 points here. You said you didn't have a second question. I've asked for a written reply. Can I move an amendment to delete Clause 3? Would the government accept my proposal? You need to tell us what you want to do to remove Clause 3. We aren't yet on CSAs. Yip Kin Yuen, 3 minutes. Chair, 2 points here. First of all, Ray Chen talked about the title of this provision, standard for playing and singing. I agree with him. When it comes to standard, you need to have a yardstick. You need to have a scale, and then we can tell whether it is meeting the requirement or not. But I'm afraid the provision itself cannot really tell us much. It simply says the national anthem must be played and sung in a way that is in keeping with its dignity, but this is not the same as the standard. So I just wondered if you can change the title of this provision, requirements when playing and singing. So I'm making this proposal concerning the choice of word. I hope the administration can consider my view. Next, many members said that for this particular clause or this part, it doesn't carry any penalty. I think in common law, I think we seldom have such an arrangement. That is, in our law, we write down something and then it is merely optional and it doesn't carry a penalty. Now, the admin's explanation is that we have got the same in the national law, and so local legislation must have the same element, and there isn't any other reason to keep it. So I just wondered if you can sort of adopt another approach, like having a code of practice or a covenant. So instead of writing it into the provision into the bill, I think the wording itself is fine, but for it to be part of the bill, I'm afraid this is not in line with our common law system and quite out of step with the laws of Hong Kong and our convention. So I wondered if you can sort of think of extracting such clauses so that we have a charter or we have a code of practice keeping such provisions. Would it be feasible? Permanent Secretary, we must consider this. That is, when a citizen reads the ordinance, can he fully understand what our requirements are like concerning the standard and etiquette for playing and singing? If we take out something from the bill, first of all, it may not be able to reflect fully the spirit and the contents of the national law. That aside, citizens would also find it difficult to understand the spirit of the law. And then I can't agree with what Mr. Yip has said. Now, he is saying that this directional provision isn't in line with our common law system. In fact, in our existing laws, we do have quite a large number of provisions that are directional only and not carrying a penalty. What about the difference between requirement and standard as the title of this provision? Maybe I can defer to Mr. Pang as to why we've adopted the word standard. Well, from the drafting perspective, if we talk about requirement for playing and singing, it means that you are required to play and sing the national anthem rather than the standard or the way that it should be played and sung. So I don't think this is what we want to achieve. I think it is really getting very serious as to the repetitiveness of the questions. Please indicate your wish to ask questions. Otherwise, in 5 minutes, I'm going to draw a line. Elvin Young, 2 minutes. 3 minutes, second round. Question for the administration. Once the bill has been passed, I want to know whether the administration has the plan to provide guidelines for the public to sing and play the national anthem. What would it be like? And do we have something similar on the mainland so as to make it easier for people to understand how it should be played and sung? I think it should be something that can be easily understood across the society. Secretary, for Mr. Elvin Young's question. Well, exactly why we have got the standard and etiquette provisions in the bill. By having them in the bill, it means it's easy for people to understand the requirements. We want people to respect the national anthem, so it's easy for us to know that there are certain etiquettes. And for the cases of insulting the national anthem, we have a clause. If you want some Q&As, yes, we can do that. But in the bill, we have clearly spelled out the standard and the etiquette, and that's why we need the two clauses.
Secretary's reply was the same problem the first response by Mr. Pang the first round. I think clause 3 and 4 is about the same thing. But my previous question was, why do we have to have a separate clause 3 independent of clause 4? And the draftsman offered explanation. However, the secretary explanation doesn't fully match that of the Mr. Pang. If clause 4 already achieved what it ought to do, why do we need to have clause 3? I know it's a rather academic discussion, but I wonder if you will allow Mr. Pang to explain. Secretary, well, Chairman, let me explain. I don't feel that my remarks departed from Mr. Draftman. With clause 3, that they'll be in a way that is keeping with the dignity. I think in a way is much broader than the etiquette. I'm chewing over what the secretary said. I thought you have no follow-up questions. Okay, have you finished chewing? Yeah, yes. Next, Mr. James Cho, 3 minutes. Not on seat. Next, Mr. Kwong. Second round, 3 minutes. So let's go back to the old question. Is this provision redundant? So speaking of looking up the dictionary, so I looked up the word dignity in Wikipedia. I reached the thought that it should not give rise to too much debate. I was wrong. Actually, named it as of now, there's no universal standard on dignity. So what should we do? You claim this is standard. I trust Wikipedia. I wonder what administration will probably amend the Wikipedia entry. I know they've been gestating for quite long. It's been plain safe. Applied for moral and politics and academic thinking and the politics there. So definition, however, not applicable here. And in the politics, they'll be used to demonstrate the injustice of penalty and, well, the aspiration of those disadvantaged looking for justice. So there's no universal standard in place. So how do we set up a standard on dignity? So in the absence of a global standard, is the provision really a redundant? Written explanation then. Or you want to answer now? Mr. Pang. Well, the wording in the legal provisions, if there's no defined term, well, from the general, we'll use a general understanding, and we have consider with the legislative intent and the purpose. I explain, even though we see a lot of word dignity and word, however, it's quite hard to borrow the term, and dignity and have different meaning in different domains. Our view is that, we mentioned in the preamble, that the Anthem is a symbol and sign of the PRC, so we have preserve the dignity. So it is in that context, and we explain what kind of dignity we're referring to. Oh no! So the draftsman explanation is that, and if you look at a different angle, the interpretation will vary, because this word, I believe, that evolved over thousands of years, and now there have been no global standard, and yet, you're putting this controversial word into this bill, even though it doesn't carry a penalty. But are you really tripping yourself? We stress times that in other laws there's no definition. The word dignity is only based on a general understanding, and thirdly, under our common law system, we will deal with it in the same way, and there are case law to explain that. I believe that we have a very clear explanation of this word. Well, however, it's up to the members whether to understand. It's not that we haven't asked the question. I believe that we have explained it very clearly. I need to draw the line here. Whoever didn't press the button would not be allowed to speak. And James Toe, which Dr. Fernando Chang, third round, 2 minutes. It would offer, if they didn't answer the questions satisfactorily, I would to see whether the good response depends. My question really depends on how good they answered. Well, written response then, and you claim the administration claimed that if we use the word requirement in place of standard would not be meeting with suited to the needs. I disagree. That government that claims it's a clear. I think the government did explain the word standard clearly. For Clause 3, the standard is claimed to be in a way in keeping with its dignity. So, a question for Mr. Pang. What do you mean by in a way? He said clearly that would include the state or notation and the brief number notation, as well as the standard related to the playing and singing. So these elements will be the standard to decide whether it meet to be met. It clearly it would not follow with the state and the number notations or the behavior and the music standard. They will be seen as not keeping with its dignity. Well, Chairman, that's a huge problem. In Clause 3, we have imposed a standard, and this standard will be used to assess whether the way it was played and sung will be in keeping with dignity. The draftsman explained clearly. And for the state and the number notation and the music and the behavior standard may not be fully complied with all the time. Let's say the piano may play badly, and the children may accuse the teacher of claiming that you're not play in a way that's keeping with the dignity. I know there's no penalty, and yet that everyone is breaching the law and not able to meet this standard. I urge the administration to consider carefully. By using the word standard, there are a lot of grave consequences. May I suggest that the anthem should be made in place should be in keeping with the dignity. Just make it simple. So you make it directional. I know the time expired. How about can you give a written response to Dr. Chang? Can you allow them to answer here? Mr. Jeremy Tam, second round, 3 minutes. It's all right. So, okay, since Dr. Chang ran out of time, so we can answer Dr. Chang's question now. Mr. Peng. So if we adopt Dr. Chang's proposal, I think we are just repeating the title. As for the standard for playing and singing can express the meaning within, and therefore it must be preserved. Mr. Tam, but just now, Dr. Chang's, well, you felt all that, okay, but can you illustrate why you feel unable to meet requirements? But can you explain if I got it correctly? The crux of Dr. Chang's question was assumed that he agreed with the representations of the nation, because a lot of people may not fully meet the standard. That having a directional provision by pointing out and how that they illustrate how the way that we play and sung in a way in Kim Kinzichi, that a commoner without a malicious intent by self, like the secretary has said, that without malicious intent but not breaching the Clause 7 due to as venue and technical constraints, if not able to fulfill the notation requirement, I believe they would not in breach of Clause 4 and 7. Let me supplement it. And just now, Dr. Chung claims that what is included, let's say, when play and sing the an anthem, what they have the stave or the numbered notation, that's one thing. And for the adequate will be covered in Clause 4. So the people would understand that the way that's in keeping with the dignity, but whether it constitutes an insult or with the intent to insult the anthem, that's a different matter. That's why we said repeatedly that Clause 3 is a directional provision to achieve the main purpose of local legislation for the public to respect the national anthem. So Dr. Chang's concern as for whether we have to fully adhere to the notation, as long as you respect and have no intention of insulting the national anthem dignity, and won't fall to Clause 7. So, for is an offense to insult the anthem. So between respect and insult, what's the in between? So I believe there's no middle room. And next, Ms. Claudia Mose, around 3 minutes. So I heard from Mr. Peng very often that singulars equal to plural. So I will not debate with you because there's no plural in Chinese. For in English, you only claim have a standard in singular form. I believe I'm getting correctly that the standard can be in form of plurals. That just could be more than one way. Mr. Peng, so in a way can be interpreted as in ways. So if we want singular, that will be said in one way. That will see that we a singular standard. So standard will also mean standards, right? And yet, you reminded me, quote, in a way that is keeping with its dignity. For Chinese is 符合. For English, I said 符合 the meaning would be to fit, to suit, or to comply with, along those lines. Well, as a normal people, I would say they in line. So why you just use in keeping with? Is that conventional legal language? Earlier, I heard the Lawyer Society, if some lawyer's performance does not in keeping with the dignity of the legal profession, there will be a disbarred. Are you simply importing the language? You read to me in keeping with. Why not use the phrase in line with? What in keeping with the dignity have been used in local legislation, and for Cat 159X and Section 5, in keeping with the dignity. I'm going to take reference our usual drafting approach. So just copying other provisions. I will extend this meeting to by 15 minutes. Whoever has pressed the button is not on their seat, and after draw the line, to not make press the button to speak any further. If you have a question, please make it in writing. And can we have Ms. Lam to explain Clause 4? Speaker not on mic. We have drawn a line a long time ago. A while back, I said that before Mr. Alvin Young speak, I appeal to members, whoever haven't pressed the button, and they should do so, as I would press the button in 5 minutes, and I draw the line in after 6 minutes. Have you all heard me?
Speaker is off mic. Please raise your question in writing. I did say that a line has been drawn. Quorum, please. Sorry, Speaker is off mic.
係，我明白你嘅。
I understand what you mean. For members who have pressed the button, they should have stayed behind to raise their questions. Miss Claudia Moe was the sixth in the line and she had her chance. So how come that the others before her couldn't ask the question? Well, there was time. There was sufficient time for her to ask the question. Even Miss Moe had her turn. I'm not talking about I wasn't talking about extending the meeting. It was at 12:45 that I extended the meeting time. Sorry, Speaker is off mic. It was 12:20ish that I suggested drawing a line. Had they stayed, they would have got their chance to do so before 12:45. Claudia Moe was further down the line and she could have a chance to ask questions. I can't stop anybody from pressing the button. Yes, you were still able to press the button, but then the line was drawn. Let me ask whether technically this could be done. Yes, I'm sure.
請你肅靜。
Order, please. I'm making inquiries with the clerk over the technical point.
即係畫咗線係可以撳唔到㗎嘛？
你可以熄咗佢㗎嘛？財會係咪成日都係咁啊？
睇唔到啦，畫咗線之後都睇唔到啦。係咪做得到？我而家問你一個簡單嘅問題，技術上做唔做得到 ？OK， 嗱，技術上佢
Technically, it could have been done. At first, I thought it couldn't be done, technically speaking. Please calm down. The next time we resume our meeting, I will allow members who had pressed the button before I drew the line to ask questions, and the time limit will be corresponding to the number of rounds that they have asked questions. What is your question? What is your question? I recall that at our last meeting, when we asked for a quorum count, you were there and you had a word with the secretary. I think you spoke loudly and said that ask the administration to get people back. I don't know whether it's a slip of tongue. I think it's a matter with their parapathy. No, I didn't. Can I play it? Yes, play the recording. Yes. Did I ask the secretariat to ask people to come back? Yes, you did say. Ask the administration to call the people back. I think it's fine if the pro-establishment came to call the members to come back. On what occasion? When the quorum bell was on. I had not wanted to raise this point, but then you're repeating the same You mean when we had a quorum count? All right. Understood. Well, you always said that there should be a written answer. I do hope so. Well, the last meeting was Saturday, and so I don't expect an answer right now. Symbol and sign, I think you need to address that question. Mr. Chen, you don't need to worry. When I ask the admin to provide an answer, the secretariat and myself will go after that.
要等啊。call call 人，call 佢。BP 一個人都冇。我哋啲人自己唔爭氣，爭3個都唔嚟唔到嚇。英文 BPA 冇人喺度，可唔可以叫一叫佢哋揾啲人翻？下次咧，我可以畫佢先。如果我想你話可以係要求法院咧撳咁即係我畫線你撳得入嚟嘅。事實上做到點解？ 少2個人問，每個6分鐘嘅。但你唔喺度喎，上次呢個係啱嘅。范國威講得啱，我應該係早講啱嘅，所以我都技術上咧都。阿報告。 你睇呢個啊嘛，跟呢個做係會議。
Meeting time is up. I declare that the meeting is adjourned.